Hi everyone. In this lesson we're going to sketch out our ideas for designing a spinning top. Spinning top is one of the simplest toys and one of the simplest shapes that we can design. We can make it with really maybe even only one shape, but I think we'll make two so that there is a handle at the top for easy spinning and a shape that will have a point at the bottom so that it can spin. And we could likely make this all one shape, but then when we print it, we're going to have some trouble because we're going to have to build supports all the way up the side of the top. And that means that the surface on the bottom here that we want to be nice and smooth so that it spins is going to be the roughest part of our design. So if we create our design in separate pieces so that the point of our top can be printed facing upright with the flat side on the surface of the ground here, and then our handle can simply be printed as another piece right next to it, and we can glue the two of them together to make our final piece. Since the only thing we need to make a functioning top is a point at the bottom and a symmetrical shape so that it doesn't wobble, we can actually use quite a few different shapes. We are going to design a spinning top that can be printed in two parts. Let's take our example and move it out of the way over here. And since it is the most obvious choice for our shape, I'm going to start with a cone. When we drag out a new cone, it's going to be 20 millimeters on each side and up and down. Well, this will work if our top is wider, it'll have more weight to it. That'll help it stay upright as it is spinning. If it's very narrow, it's going to be easy to tip over. So let's go ahead and make the bottom of this wider. But actually, we want the top to be wider. So in this case, since the cone has a top and a base radius, I can just change the numbers on here instead of flipping this cone over. So we can make the top radius, and let's put it up to 20. Since the radius is half of the circle, makes the entire thing 40 millimeters wide. We'll click on our base radius and bring it all the way down, as close to 0 as we can get, which is close enough to make a nice point at the bottom. We can also see that with the cone, we can change the height here, but I think 20 is fine. And we can change the number of sides, which if we increase it, is going to make the cone look a lot smoother. That won't help the top one way or the other, but I like how it looks. You could turn the sides all the way down, and you could end up with a triangle here. And this is still symmetrical, so it should still theoretically work as a top. Now I'm going to make a nice smooth cone by turning the sides all the way up. And next we're going to need a handle. So we're going to drag in a cylinder. I'm also going to increase the sides of the cylinder so it matches, it's nice and smooth. But the cylinder is pretty wide compared to our top. Since I don't have a radius here, I'm going to have to click on the corner of this, and we can see that it's 20 millimeters in each direction. I'll make this half as big. I'll click on the number here, and then type in 10. I can hit Tab on the keyboard to go to the other number that's visible, and hit 10 as well. So now I know that my cylinder here is still a perfect circle because it's 10 millimeters in both directions. We know our top here is 20 millimeters tall, and I want to be able to stick this handle partway in to our top so that when we glue it in, we have a spot that we know is exactly in the center, so we won't put our handle off center and cause our top to wobble. I'm going to raise this up, and I don't want it to go over the top of this. I want it to be partway in. So instead of making it 20 or more, I'm going to click on this measurement here. We can see that it shows how high you've just picked it up off of the ground. Our up and down measurement here is the only way to move that. I'm going to click on that and change it to 18. So now I know that this is going to stick into my top by just 2 millimeters. Now we need to make it centered. So let's click an empty space and drag a box around our two shapes. You can see that we have both shapes selected, and now I can go over here to the Align tool, and we can look and make sure that the center mark is gray. It looks like I actually have already put it right in the center by accident. So that's nice. But if I have my handle way over here, you can see if I select the two and hit Align, I can click on the center, it will line up in that direction. And then I can click on the center here, and it will line them up in the other direction. Now we know that our two circular objects are directly in the center of each other. Now, since I don't want to print this all as one piece, I want to be able to print my top with the flat side down and my handle separately to add to it. I'm not going to group these two together. I'm going to take my handle here, and I'm going to make a duplicate. This little stack of squares here, or Control D, and that's going to create a new copy of the handle that's in the exact same spot. Now it looks like maybe nothing happened, but if you try to move this, you'll see you have a duplicate. So let's try that again. I'm going to click on this and hit duplicate. And now that I have my duplicate in the same spot, I'm going to change that duplicate into a hole. Just like any object can be a solid or a hole, I can take this new hole that's in the exact same spot. We can see it's highlighting the entire cylinder. If I were to group these together, this hole would cut the cylinder away and there would be nothing left. But I don't want to group it with the cylinder. I want to hold down Shift, click on this cone here. Now I have only the two shapes selected, the hole and the cone, and I can group them. Now that I've grouped them, the hole has cut out the shape from the cone, which means I have a nice little 2 millimeter notch here that I can use to fit my handle in after I'm done printing. You can try out a lot of different shapes to make your own top and use the same technique. Keep the width of your object between 40 and 50 and the height at 20, and we can cut out the same handle from a lot of things as long as you can give them a point that faces downward. We can use a pyramid, a star even, or this diamond shape. Now if you bring in a shape with a point on the top that you want to use as your top, then we're going to have to flip it over so that the point faces downwards, which we'll do by clicking on the mirror tool and click on this up-down arrow that appears. You can see we flip our object over so the point faces down. The cone is the only object that has a top and bottom radius that you can change to make it pointed downwards. So you'll have to do this mirror trick for anything else that you need to point down. Next lesson, we'll set these pieces up so that we can print our different tops without a large amount of support. We are going to set up our spinning top in order to print it. I've mentioned in previous lessons that if we print our top in this way, we're going to need a ton of support underneath it to hold up this shape, since it's only going to touch the floor of the printer at one point. If I select one of my tops and I export this, I will choose only the selected shape so that I don't download all of my other examples. I can bring this into Cura for slicing, and we will see what that means. So if I click on open and get my spinning top, we can see that when we bring our STL file in, we now have completely red on the bottom. All of the faces that face downwards are not touching the floor. It only touches at the tiniest point at the tip, which means our first layer is going to be a tiny dot that sticks to the floor, and everything else is going to have to be built on top of it. If we tried to print our print like this without support, it's going to at some point fall to the side off of its one little tiny attachment, and it'll make a mess. So we'll have to turn on supports. I'll slice this to show you just what that means. We'll take a look at the preview. In our preview, we can see all of the blue lines are our helpers, and that includes our skirt, which is just to start the plastic flowing around the outside, and our supports, which are going to be a cylinder all the way around our top. If I scroll down here, we can see that we're going to make all of our parts, and all the way down to the bottom, we're going to need to build this tower. Right before it reaches our object, it's going to print a layer that is a little bit away from our cone, and that's going to hold it in place while we print. Then we're going to have to break it off at the end. That means we'll probably have some rough spots and some damage we'll need to clean up or sand off to make our top work. Plus, we'll need to use up a bunch of extra plastic just to build these supports. So instead of doing all of that work, we're going to do a little bit of work ahead of time and make our top easier to print. Let's head over here and move both of our objects separately. I'm going to take the handle and hit D on the keyboard to drop it on the floor. Could also move this around and change the height to 0, but D is a handy shortcut for putting anything you need on the floor. And because this shape is perfectly symmetrical, I can just use the mirror tool and flip it upside down. Now we can see that we have our notch for the handle on the underside, and everything else is flat on the ground. And I can take these two parts, and for now, we'll just export them as one. We could export them each separately and print them one at a time if we want, but since they're so small, I think I can print them both at once. Let's hit export. We'll take only their selected shapes. And now we have a new version of the spinning top, just adds the number 1 to it. Let's head over here, get spinning top number 1. And now we can see that both of the surfaces that touch the floor are highlighted in blue, and that means that they'll actually be connected to the floor of the printer so that everything else will build on top of them and we can peel them off later. There's one red space here, and that is because we have a hole that goes 2 millimeters up into this surface. So we can leave our supports on, and it'll build a tiny amount of support in there so that that doesn't sag down. Let's go ahead and slice this. And in our preview now, we can see that the printer is going to print each of these parts right here where it gets to the top of our hole, we'll have this little bit of support material that we'll just have to pull out at the end and replace it with our handle. Now we can see that the inside of our piece is not going to be solid. It's going to be printed with our cubic infill, which is the default for this printer. This should still be okay, but if you want your print to be more solid or heavy, then you could increase the amount of infill. You could go all the way up to 100%, which would fill each and every layer in solidly with plastic. But it would end up taking a long time. You can see that it'll be an hour and a half if we fill our entire top in with plastic, which isn't too bad for a print. And that would make our entire piece a little heavier and a little sturdier. But I think we can get away with a lot less infill. Now I'm down to half an hour or so to print this, and I can do the same with my other top designs. For any of our shapes that we have already separated, we can go ahead and use the mirror tool to flip them upside down. And flip, there we go. And as long as we have a flat surface on the top, which is now the bottom, we'll be able to print it. So experiment with what kind of shapes you can use to make into a top. Remember, they have to have a flat side and a pointed side, and they'll need to be symmetrical. See which ones will spin the longest.